Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the NRG series here, 10K Standard Showdown in Lansing, Michigan. I am Devin O'Donnell, better known as Doomwake on the internet, and I'm joined by Ross Merriam. We had Mason in the booth for a little bit, and now we got Ross in to get us in the last round of Swiss right before the top eight. And we have a little bit of Is It Cauldron in the feature match, Ross, but definitely not a mirror match.
Yeah, not a mirror, fortunately. We get to see, hero versus villain, VV versus something else. It'll be against Azorius Control, Ryan Hayes on Cauldron, and Katarina Aldrich on Azorius Control. So, um, you know, from watching the earlier rounds of this event, I think it's pretty clear that Azorius Control is the player's choice in terms of anti-Cauldron decks. It's really, increased in metagame share and prevalence over the last couple weeks online, and it showed out at the tournament here today. There's several players here still in contention for the top 8 on that deck, so kind of a breakout deck from the weekend. Since everybody came into the weekend targeting VV, we knew that was going to show up. Azorius Control is the surprise.
Absolutely. So we'll have to see how that matchup plays out in just a moment. But before we get on down to the feature match area, we are going to take a look and see what the players are playing for because there's a lot at stake here. First place, $2,400 and 30 NRG leaderboard points. Second place, 1,225. And then it kind of goes on from there, along with the NRG champs and regional championship invites as well. We have a lot of players towards the top of our feature match area who are maybe vying for those leaderboard spots. So it'll be interesting to see how that kind of shakes up and to see if, well, really anybody can catch Grayson. And at this rate, I'm not sure that's possible, but we'll have to see. And I believe our players are just about ready. So let's go ahead and bring you down. So, as Ross mentioned, we have Katarina on the right hand side of your screen playing Azorius Control and Ryan on the left playing VV Cauldron. Now, you mentioned, Ross, how, Azorius Control, a lot of players maybe targeted this deck as, one of the few decks that maybe has a somewhat positive matchup against VV. Talk to me about like why specifically that is. Like, what is it about the Azorius deck that makes it, reasonable or to good against VV?
The reality is that any control deck, when the metagame is narrowed, and dominated so much by a very few decks, can be built in a targeted way. That's the nature of control decks. So that they tend to suffer in wide open metagames where you don't know exactly what you're going to play against every round, and you might run up to things that you're not prepared for. When as powerful as the Cauldron deck is, if you build your deck with a ton of tools that line up well against it, things like Seam Rip to answer early Profs and Agatha Soul Cauldrons, good counter spells to stop some of the card draw, some graveyard hate, just a good mix of interaction that is directly targeted at the VV Cauldron deck, you can have success.
Exactly, yeah, and we'll have to see if that is how this matchup plays out. Players, taking a look at some mulligans with regards to Katarina's deck list, and this is kind of true to a lot of the blue-white control decks that we've seen today. They're actually getting a little bit heavier on Overlord of the Mistmoors in the main deck. So access to a little bit more threats and maybe some chump blockers. When the VV Cauldron is playing that big setup turn where they put some counters on creatures and maybe you just need that extra blocker to be able to survive. So we see the scariest start here from the VV Cauldron deck in turn 1 Marauding Mako, and Katarina's going to follow it up with a Meticulous Archive. Ryan on turn 2 here. Maybe a bit of a show of weakness here, going for Quantum Riddler instead of something like a Profs, a Fomo, or a Cauldron. Maybe that signifies that Ryan's hand is a little weaker than he'd like.
Yeah, any of those good 2 drops, Fear of Missing Out, Cauldron, or Profs, would have applied more pressure here, put Katarina more under the gun. Now it just feels like she has more room to breathe, and that is very beneficial for a control deck.
Yep. So it looks like Ryan did pick up a copy of Agatha's Soul Cauldron off of the Riddler. So maybe Ryan will go ahead and wants to go towards that. I think I see a Mako as well, along with a Profs. So we'll see if there's a third land. Maybe Ryan wants to go Mako into Profs. I think I see a Steam Core as well. So a lot of options here. If you're sitting in Ryan's spot, what do you think the play is here, Ross?
Well, I'm generally a fan of getting Cauldron down as quickly as possible to make that threat. But with 2 mana up for the control deck, you also want to play it around a counter spell. So In this particular matchup, I like the line that Ryan has taken here, being a little cagier, just applying a little pressure by pumping the Marauding Mako, and making sure that Katarina doesn't get to use their mana and interact profitably this turn.
Yeah, and Ryan, with a little bit of an entomb there, Thundering Fall is going to go ahead and put Vivi into the graveyard. And now that Agatha Soul Cauldron looks a lot scarier if Ryan is able to deploy and resolve that. But you'll notice the patience here from Ryan. So really respecting the possibility of counter spells, something like Normalize, and maybe potentially Ryan wants to, make Katarina use their mana on a turn when they have four. So, for example, Katarina plays fourth land, wants to cast Consult the Star Charts. Maybe that's the turn where Ryan wants to start a fight, and maybe make Katarina use their mana instead of casting something like Consult the Star Charts.
Yeah, this is classic sequencing against a control deck, not letting them use their mana on the turns where they want to play counter spells and forcing them to use their mana on the turn where they want to play their card draw spells. Meanwhile, Ryan was able to use his mana on all of these turns, cycling Marauding Mako and playing Thundering Falls. Then turn 4, just activate Soulstone Sanctuary. So he may not be making the most advantageous play, but he is progressing his game plan every single turn without exposing himself to potential interaction from Katarina.
Yeah, and you see No More Lies here. Ryan setting it up perfectly, has the 3 mana left over to pay. And, even if Katarina had something like a second copy of No More Lies, they do have that fountain port there. So that is preventing that from even casting it. So this Cauldron is going to resolve, which, with the Vivi in the graveyard, does have the ability to do the thing, which Ryan is going to do, presumably putting a counter on the Soulstone. Now, I did get a glimpse of Katarina's hand, and they do have a get loss, so that'll at least take care of the Soulstone. But Ryan still has access to 2 mana, can maybe deploy something like a Prosthetic Memory, maybe another Quantum Riddler, and we'll see if Ryan can actually use that 2 mana here. And if not, just a couple of maps.
Sure. Yeah, got lost. It gives him something to do with the 2 mana.
So first map's going to hit a land, and second Vivi here. Now there's already one under the Cauldron. Potentially an upside of putting it into the graveyard to have a second activation of mana next turn. If you're in Ryan's spot, what do you think? Would you keep that VV?
Really depends on Ryan's hand, how threat heavy it is. The more threat heavy your hand is, the more you can afford to put the VV in the graveyard and go for mana. But looking at Ryan's hand, it's just lands and a Steam Core Scholar. So the extra threat of VV being cast is more valuable than the extra mana because he doesn't have a ton of things to spend that mana on.
Makes a lot of sense. So it looks like Katarina's going to go for a stock up here. Now, you mentioned when we were talking about, what makes this blue-eye control deck so good against Cauldron is the presence of Seam Rip. Now, this weekend, Katarina only has 2 in their main deck, and from what I can tell, there's 3 copies of Pinnacle Star Cage as well, but not access to that this turn because there's only 2 mana left over. So if Katarina does not find a copy of Seam Rip off of the stock up, Ryan's going to be able to untap and have the extra 3 mana to be able to deploy multiple spells this turn. And like you mentioned, right now has the Steam Core and the VV. Maybe the Steam Core can find some more action.
Yeah, and this was the benefit for Ryan acting the way he did, made Katarina's mana very awkward. They tried to interact a little bit on the previous turn, which is a turn they probably would have liked to be casting stock up or something like Consult the Star Charts. Instead, had to stock up now on turn 5 and is going to fall further and further behind in this game as Ryan leverages the mana advantage from Soul Cauldron.
Yeah, and even in a spot like this, if Ryan doesn't have anything to use the extra mana on in his hand, he still does have the Quantum Riddler in exile over there. 3 cards in hand, so can't quite get the full bonus off of it. But yeah, and the sequencing is good here perfect here from Ryan because he wants to make sure he uses all of his mana before activating any of the creatures for VV mana, maximizing the amount of mana that he can make off Mako, and that's going to do it here. Ryan taking down game number 1 over Katarina. Just Katarina could not find the answers in time, and Ryan's going to take game 1 here. So we're going to go ahead and move on over to the sideboards in just a very brief moment. We'll take a look at Katarina's first. They are working with 2 copies of Voice of Victory, 1 Clarion Conqueror, 2 Cutsel's Flanker, 2 Tishana's Tidebinder, 3 Bays of the Bounding Spring, an Exercise, a Flash Freeze, a Seam Rip, and 2 Rest in Peace. If you're on Katarina's side, what do you like here, Ross?
So, like the artifact enchantment removal, exercise, seam rip. I think the Clarion Conqueror should play well in this matchup as well. The rest in pieces as additional graveyard hate. And then, you could potentially bring in Kutzel's flankers, more graveyard hate. You can bring in Tishana's Tidebinder. There's so many things, relevant things to counter, and the body just trades for a creature. So I think that'll come in too. So a lot of cards coming in for Katarina out of the sideboard. I would consider Beza as well. Not sure if that's better or worse than Overlord of the Mistmoors, kind of fighting for space with that card. It'll depend, exactly how much Katarina values the life gain versus the additional flyers from Overlord. Ryan's list is heavy on Steam Core Scholars. We saw one in game one, so maybe Katarina thinks I need more flying blockers and goes for the Overlord instead. But a lot of really strong interaction to come in from their side.
Yeah, all makes sense to me. We talked about the blue eye control deck having these white interactive spells, very very good at fighting the permanent based from Agatha Soul Cauldron and Proph's Eidetic Memory. So speaking of Ryan and the blue red Cauldron deck, let's go ahead and see if we can get Ryan's deck list on screen for you here. So the sideboard has 2 copies of Quantum Riddler to complement the 2 in the main deck, so all the way up to 4 copies. 2 Annul, 3 Fire Magic, 2 Spell Pierce, 1 Abrade, 2 Disdainful Stroke, an Obliterating Bolt, and 2 Broadside Barrage. If you're on Ryan's side, what are you bringing in here?
So you definitely want to bring in the counter spells in Spell Pierce and Disdainful Stroke. And having 4 total copies of those cards is on the high side for Cauldron lists. So Ryan clearly coming prepared for control. The Quantum Riddlers you'll definitely want for additional card advantage. Those 6 are locks to come in. Beyond that, there's the potential to bring in a null if you want a narrow answer to something like Pinnacle Star Cage and Overlord of the Mistmoors. There's also the potential to bring in Broadside Barrage if you're concerned about things like Beza. Maybe it can help you deal with an Elspeth, and is certainly better than some of the removal spells in the main deck, like Abrade and Torch the Tower, that will be coming out. So you got 6 definites and then 4 optionals for Ryan.
Yeah, I'm really happy that you brought up a null. That's a very interesting one because there is the Pinnacle Star Cages and the Seam Rips, and as I talked about previously, these blue white lists are a little heavier on Overlord these days, as opposed to something like maybe Beza that they played main deck in the past. So if Ryan is maybe aware of that and maybe understands that maybe there are potentially more copies of those, maybe wants to go towards those as we see here's some early game starts here. Met Ryan with the turn 1 Mako yet again, and Katarina in classic blue white control fashion, just holding up some mana. Looks like a couple copies of No Moralize and maybe some more lands. And Ryan just pretty content with playing the slow game. And, we saw Ryan in game 1 be patient with the Cauldron, deployed it basically on the perfect turn where he had access to 5 mana. And, especially in the post board games where Ryan is, as you mentioned, like a little bit more counterspell heavy and more threat dense with the Riddlers, maybe he's more akin to play this sort of like just Delver style game or just play a threat and kind of sit on it for a while.
Yeah, I think that I agree. That's how Ryan is looking to approach this game. I think his hand didn't have a 2-drop, so he didn't really have a decision to make. But finds the Spell Pierce on turn 3, so now he's going to wait till turn 4, so he can at least Spell Pierce something like 3 steps ahead. Unfortunately, Katarina made all their land drops and now has no more lies with 2 mana to pay for a Pierce. So
Yeah, Mako's gonna get in there. And yeah, we'll see exactly what Katarina decides to do next turn. And this is kind of that spot where Blue Eye Control gets to be in, where now that Katarina has the Fountain Port as well, Ryan is in a situation where, maybe he doesn't want to play into the mana, but if he doesn't play into the mana, at least Katarina has something to do, even if they don't have a copy of, Consult or 3 Steps to Draw or anything like that.
yeah, so Ryan hasn't been able to establish nearly as much early pressure as he was in game 1. Definitely behind the 8 ball in this second game. We'll likely see him be a little bit more aggressive from here on out as a result.
Yeah, 2 mana for a Riddler. That's just going to be a cantrip. Now, the Riddler has some interesting applications where sometimes, maybe not, it's not going to come up this game, but the 2 mana for the 4 power body can really matter in spots where you have sort of like the Cauldron VV setup already. So, don't laugh at that that body that it's it doesn't look like it does that much, but there's certainly spots where it does, and also Winter Knight, that could happen as well.
Ryan does have the case Wild Ride in his deck and in his hands. He could have
Ooh.
gotten aggressive there, tried to get in for 7, chose not to. Looks like he's mulling over whether or not to play a VV into a potential counter. Like I said, he senses that he's falling behind, and yeah, you made a good point with the Fountain Port that gives Katarina something to do if they don't use their mana on interactive cards. So Ryan now heavily incentivized to just play out his hand and try to generate a little bit of card advantage to grind through the interaction from Azorius control, and he's done that at least with the Quantum Riddler.
Interesting decision there for Katarina. A very subtle thing because I believe they do still have if I recall correctly, I think there might have been a second copy of Normalize. So decided to go for the 3 steps ahead, utilizing all 5 mana instead of exiling the VV. What do you think about that decision?
Well, mana efficiency can be very important. I do think I would lean towards getting the VV into exile, but I understand the importance of mana efficiency. So there has to be a plan here. Maybe it's something like a consult kicked, and they wanted to protect it with a No More Lies on this turn. That would make a lot of sense.
Yeah, that's fair. As we see a second Mako here for Ryan, and just like last game, has 4 mana available to go ahead and activate that Soul Stone. We're going to see a
Okay.
consult here. Go ahead.
Yeah, this makes perfect sense. So Katarina wanted to consult this turn, so wanted to keep the 2 mana counter. Um, you know, didn't get necessarily paid off because the 2 mana counter had no use here. Ryan instead has the plan to activate the Soulstone Sanctuary, so it's a slight punish based on how it played out, but from Katarina's perspective on the previous turn, makes complete sense.
Yeah, and there's almost this thing where in the post board games, like sometimes when you have a card like Normalized Mana Leak that sort of counter unless you pay X amount of mana, you're worried about them maybe getting dead later into the game. But in this post board configuration where Ryan has, the 4 copies of Quantum Riddler, some number of Winter Night stories that he may eventually want to spend 5 mana on, there's a good opportunity that even if you don't use the Normalize early on, you're probably still going to find a target for it at some point.
Yeah, and especially with the Riddler sitting in exile
Right.
already, Katarina knows that's coming eventually. There's a good chance that can get normalized later. So, while it was a slight punish this turn, that punish may go away if the normalize eventually trades for a card.
And I think Katarina may have picked up a copy of Elspeth here. So, they have an interesting decision. Okay, we're going to go for a seam rip. I was going to say maybe like Elspeth with a no moralize up. But, that could potentially, if Ryan has maybe into the Floodmaw or another removal spell to clear the 1/1s, maybe that could threaten the Elspeth. So decides to go for a seam rip on the Mako instead. And Soulstone is going to be activated now. Big turn here for Ryan. Let's see what we have to work with. I think I saw a Cauldron. I believe there's another VV. Looks like a Spell Pierce and a Wild Ride. So you potentially Ryan could go for something like a VV plus a Wild Ride this turn, but we know that's no good due to the Normalize.
Yeah. Could also go for Cauldron because of the Soulstone Sanctuary. Has mana to pay for No More Lies, but he'll attack first, see if Katarina wants to commit some of their mana before Ryan commits any of his.
And Mako just staring at that Restless Anchorage like, you want some? And then second main, here is a VV. So presumably that one will get the No More Lies.
And No More Lies does trade for a card, so everything works out well for Katarina there. Just really has to clean up these last couple of creatures, and this game might enter garbage time.
Yeah, there's the Cauldron and the Mako. We still have to, the Quantum Riddler is over there, but Katarina has a ton of cards in their hand. Just resolved the consult, the star charts, and I think I'm pretty sure they took an Elspeth off of the consult. I know there was an Elspeth in the pile, so I don't know if they 100% took it or not, but we will have to see.
I see an Elspeth there, I think, at the front of the hand.
Yep, and it looks like that is.
Oh no!
Is that a rest in peace?
That's a rest in peace. Okay.
Okay.
That is a weird printing of rest in peace.
Yeah, I actually don't know what that's from, but I want to say maybe Chad. I'm sure Chad will know. I think it's like maybe, I don't know, the Secret Lair or something. But in any case, Rest in Peace does hit the battlefield. And I think the leftovers for Katarina are Overlord and counter, some counter of some kind.
It's pretty
Secret
good
layer.
leftovers.
Yeah, no, those are pretty good. Yeah, those aren't bad. Because Ryan maybe wants to go for something like the Riddler this turn, but if Katarina has that counter spell, that can go ahead and answer that. Maybe free to jam the Overlord next turn. We'll have to see what Ryan does here.
We've entered the stage of the game where Ryan now has to be very wary of the big threats out of Azorius control, the Overlords, the Elspeths, the Meringue River Regents. So it's not just about making sure his own threats resolve. It's about making sure he still has the ability to either answer those big threats from Azorius control or go wide around them. And there's got to be some aggressive plays to the board coming soon.
Yeah, and that's the thing that's really different about this Azorius control deck compared to some that we may have seen in the past, where you might be used to these control decks like the Ivan Flock variety that their win condition is Elixir of Immortality. We're not doing that anymore. We're casting 6-7 flyers and we're putting 10 power worth of creatures into play with Overlords. Like these control decks, when they turn the corner, they almost like sort of one shot you. It's crazy.
Yeah, and that's very important because the decks they're playing against are so powerful. If you give them 5 or 10 turns of dirtling, they can draw back into the game, even from a very lopsided position. So important to be able to have that ability to turn the corner.
All right, so Katarina picked up, plays a land for turn. I thought, pretty sure I saw an Overlord in there, but looks like we're deciding to hold up. I think I saw 3 steps as well. So yeah, I believe the hand is, there might be a flanker in Katarina's hand. That might be what I was looking at. So flanker, 3 steps, maybe a couple lands, and that Quantum Riddler still hanging out there for Ryan. Has not decided to go for that one yet.
Yeah, with the Wild Ride in hand, I think Ryan is trying to set up a hasty Quantum Riddler, which could potentially be a surprise lethal that
Yeah.
Katarina is not prepared to answer.
Sort of like try to get Katarina to exhaust all their resources, and then this is sort of my final finish. Like you've used all your stuff. Here's 5 mana, Riddler, Wild Ride. That is a one shot with Katarina at 7. So that's a good catch. We decided to go for a Profs instead, and I'll pick up a card here for Ryan.
And the Profs could make this Kutzel's flanker look rather awkward. But Ryan doesn't have a way to pump both creatures. Right now, both of his creatures are 3/3s. The Kutzel's flanker could trade with either one. The Profs will pump one of them out of range. If he had something like a Tersa or a Steamcore Scholar that could, discard and pump the Mako, and then the Profs can pump the Soulstone, that would have been ideal. But instead, just the second Riddler here.
Perhaps an in combat cycle Mako.
Does he have another one? I think he's cycled 2 so far. That's how the Mako in play got 2 counters.
Yeah, I don't think there's another one. So he's going to go target the Soulstone. We get in there with both. So yeah, I mean, like you mentioned, Katarina can go for the flanker. That can potentially trade for the 3/3 Mako, but I don't know if Katarina has an answer in hand to the Soulstone. Now they do have the Fountain Port, so that can at least make a fish to get in the way of that giant 5/5 Soulstone. Yeah. So we're gonna go ahead and scry. There's a Get Lost, which is quickly topped. That one makes sense.
So you use just gonna take the damage from the Soulstone. Go to 4. Wants to leave up the counter spell.
Yeah, because Katarina only has 6 mana, so if they make a token with the Fountain Port, they would only have 2 left over, so that would not be enough to cast that 3 steps. And yeah, looks like Ryan's pretty content to just go to the end phase here. And that's the nice thing about these Riddlers is, they're face up, obviously, but eventually they do sort of require that they create this threat that does require an answer. It's not like Katarina can just ignore those forever. They are large flyers and they do draw some cards. Ryan sitting on that Spell Pierce hadn't really found a good window to use that one.
Yeah, but with Katarina using this Fountain Port a lot, there might be a window that comes open at some point. It's like an exercise.
Yeah.
So deciding to use the exercise instead of the Get Lost, not give Ryan any maps until it's absolutely necessary.
I think that also makes sense too, because Katarina is maybe aware of hasters, something like a Tersa. We know that Ryan has the Wild Ride in hand, so the Get Lost is going to be a perfect answer to that. So
Yeah. Now, with Ryan having all these Quantum Riddlers, he is ahead in the attrition fight. Katarina hasn't found any additional card advantage or a threat to turn the corner. So it might take a few turns. Katarina's going to have some draw steps to try to get back into this. But right now, Ryan pretty far ahead on cards.
yeah,
Katarina is sort of flooded.
and we thought that Katarina had taken a threat off of that initial consult a couple turns prior, but it looked like they didn't. So they just, prioritized the answers, and yeah, there's two answers in hand for two potential threats. But if those answers answer the Riddlers, then that is just Ryan's going to be up more cards in those exchanges because the Riddlers are basically free cards. They've already replaced themselves. So it's Katarina can maybe answer the stuff that is currently face up and on board, but eventually, Ryan's going to present more threats than Katarina can have answers for, at least at this rate, unless, Katarina can start chaining like stock ups and consults and things of that nature.
But the 3 steps ahead does draw 2, discard 1, and now the map gets, or the treasure, excuse me, gets sacrificed to Fountain Port for an extra card. So, already generating a couple extra cards just from what they had left over. Not sure if they found anything that good. I think it was just 2 lands off the 3 steps ahead, and Katarina kept the second Fountain Port. And then the next 2 cards looked like just a couple more answers.
I think I might have seen a Star Cage in
Yeah.
Katarina's hand.
And at this point, the Star Cage looks kind of bad.
Yeah, not great.
Rest
Not
in
great.
peace on Katarina's side.
Right.
Yeah, they were really looking for one of those powerful creatures or an Elspeth or another piece of card advantage and did not find it.
Yeah. So, I mean, has looks like a Normalize as well, which, funny enough, as we mentioned, maybe not the best in spots like this, but with those Riddlers, that one can certainly, the Normalize can certainly answer that. So we'll see what Ryan decides to do here. Maybe he wants to go for something like another Riddler. I'm pretty sure Ryan still has a Cauldron and a Spell Pierce in hand, so those ones not looking super great here. And I think he picked up a third Riddler as well. So just an endless chain of Riddlers.
Just riddling all over the
Riddle me
place.
this. They call him the Rizzler. They don't actually call him that, but
They could.
they could. Yes. All right, Riddler. There's the Normalize. So yeah, that's the second Normalize that I wasn't 100% positive that Katarina was going to get to use, but it does make a lot more sense with the texture of these post board games where the Normalize, even in spots like this, Katarina has what 12 lands in play, so it's let me see, a little Cauldron here.
Ryan just wants to empty his hand so
Yeah,
this
yeah.
third Riddler draws extra cards.
Makes sense. So Katarina's gonna go making a treasure. Picked up another Get Lost. That doesn't attack.
There's so many incredible draws in Katarina's deck here that can close out this game. Just need to find it. And I guess the 2 Fountain Ports and the Restless Anchorage is another card advantage engine. Just make a map
Right.
every turn, sack them to draw cards.
Yeah. Yeah, they have 2 maps right now with 2 Fountain Ports on tap, so we can go that as well as the treasure. So has access to plenty of cards, but yeah, I mean, with 2 Get Losts in hand, it seems like from this position, right, with the Rest in Peace in play and the 2 Get Losts in hand, it seems like Katarina has enough answers to buy a good amount of time until they can find that Overlord. But we'll have to see how this plays out.
Yeah. I neglected the power of Fountain Port when I was
Oh
evaluating the
yeah.
attrition fight. And the
Mm.
Fountain Port's really putting in work here along with the Restless Anchorage to pull Katarina through this sequence of pretty bad draws. That said, Winter Night Stories, off the top for Ryan is a nice source of card advantage.
Yep. So Winter Night, going to pick up a couple of cards, discarding another Winter Night, and I think that might have been another Cauldron.
I think it was a land.
Okay. And then a Scholar here. So with that Profs in play, already drawn 3. This is going to be 2 more, so that would be potentially 5. We know Katarina has the Get Lost here. Is there any potential decision here from Katarina to kill the Profs instead of the Steam Core Scholar, you think?
With another Get Lost in hand, you're more incentivized to just kill creatures, especially since that's the first profs of the game, and there could very easily be another one sitting in Ryan's hand. So I would lean towards hitting the creature here.
Makes sense to me. So there's counters on the Scholar. We're going to draw some cards. Oh, I was going to say, are we going to get the Spell Pierce something? Okay. Because there is the potential. Oh, Katarina's got the treasure? Okay. No, I was going to say. Because I'm pretty sure Ryan still has that Spell Pierce in hand.
Oh, yeah. I'm a little surprised he didn't discard it. He's valuing it quite a bit. Seems confident that he'll get to use it. Discarded a Winter Night Stories over it.
That is surprising. Yeah, I didn't even realize that when he discarded the stories. But yeah, hanging on to that Spell Pierce. Maybe he just figures that there's going to be this, like, I don't know, big turn where Katarina uses Fountain Ports, finds a consult, casts it, something along those lines. But see a Seam Repair taking out that Profs, and then the other Get Lost. The Get Lost can answer the Scholar. So yeah, Katarina has the board, again, just sort of answered per se. Ooh, is it a Clarion Conqueror?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Doesn't do a whole lot here, but
Not a ton.
once Katarina
Well,
clears off this Steam Core Scholar, maybe the Conqueror and the Restless Anchorage can close it out.
Conqueror is a combo with Get Lost. You give them maps and they can't use them, right? All right, so Ryan's going to pick up a card. Still a fistful of action here. I think he picked up is that a negate?
Thought it was another Scholar.
Okay, yeah, Scholar. So FOMO, Scholar, Riddler, Spell Pierce, I believe, are the holdings here for Ryan. So has a ton of options here, but you see the shake of the head. Maybe not options that he would none of his favorite options, I guess, per se. Maybe you start with FOMO and try to go a little bit deeper. Maybe you start with the Scholar. Tough spot here for Ryan.
Yeah, and now without the Profs, there's not a ton of value to just filtering through the deck. So I like starting with the Riddler here. This is the one card that doesn't require a decision to be made. Like Scholar and FOMO, you have to decide what cards to discard. So draw as many cards as you can before you have to start making decisions.
Yeah, let's see what he finds. 3 mana, maybe a Scholar. There is the Scholar. Now the question, Ross, is: are we finally going to discard the Spell Pierce? Do you think he believes?
It certainly seems like he believes it. Discarding the Winter Night Stories last turn is a strong statement of belief.
That is fair.
In the power of Spell Pierce and the power of friendship. But I think that belief may have been misplaced.
All right, so No More Lies. That is the I think that's the 4th No More Lies here for Katarina. So that's going to take care of the Scholar. It is pretty refreshing to see No More Lies cast on turn. I don't know what turn we're on. I'm going to guess like 16 or 17 in that range, and still get some value out of it. So
yeah, and maybe a Spell Pierce on turn 20. We don't know.
Yeah.
Now
this is interesting because Ryan does still have that Wild Ride. He never went for it, so does have the option to maybe go for the Wild Ride on the Riddler. Right? We never used the Wild Ride, did he?
No, the Wild Ride is still in hand as well.
Okay.
It looks like he decided not to.
Because that might have been a turn, right? Where Katarina only had 3 mana left over. If he had gone for the Wild Ride and had 1 mana left over, Katarina would have had to have double removal spell. And if on the second removal spell, you maybe would have been able to pierce it. Interesting.
Yeah, that could have been a turn to really get aggressive. Instead, they're going to ditch the Pierce finally. So no more belief. Friendship over.
Friendship with Spell Pierce ended. New friend, Quantum Riddler.
And the Thundering Fall is just surreal as a land. So now Ryan pretty low on action at this point. I wonder, will he try to eventually set up a double Wild Ride on 2 different creatures and have, a bunch of lethal attackers?
Well, he can't do that with the Rest in Peace, right?
Oh, yeah. So, yeah, you only have the 1 Wild Ride no matter what. I'm kind of surprised he didn't use it last turn. That seems like his best opportunity.
The only thing I can think of, so Katarina had 3 lands untapped in the treasure. Now, obviously, the treasure is turned off because of the Clarion Conqueror. Maybe that's something where Ryan just like forgot about the treasure being turned off and thought about a situation where Katarina has two mana removal spells with 2 mana left over. I'm not positive, but I mean, from our perspective, it did seem like a safe turn to go for the Wild Rabbit Spell Pierce backup. Katarina having access to 5 mana, and they would need 2 removal spells because you're presenting 2 lethal threats.
Well, they would have had the chump block with the Clarion Conqueror, so it wouldn't have been lethal, but
True,
it would have eaten the Conqueror.
That's fair. Okay, Scholar here for Ryan. And, with that Clarion Conqueror tapped, that Scholar is a legal target for Wild Ride. I mean, it doesn't prevent a ton of damage, but it's enough to close the finish line if Katarina's out of gas. Now, I believe there is still a second Get Lost in hand, because I don't think they used the other Get Lost from a while ago. So I think they still have one more.
It's definitely in Katarina's hand. There's a Get Lost there, but now the Vivi is a real threat. So Ryan goes Vivi, then Wild Ride the Steam Core Scholar, force you to kill that. Maybe my Vivi lives and deals the last 2 points of damage.
All right, we're going to draw a card here for Katarina. That means they're digging for something. Not sure if they found it. Vivi's going to resolve here, and there is a Get Lost left over. So we're going to Wild Ride the Scholar. That's going to trigger Vivi. Now, we know Katarina has that covered with the Get Lost, but that means you have to let the Vivi stay in play for at least a little bit. So Katarina's going to fall to 3.
There's a Fear of Missing Out as the last card in Ryan's hand, and the Quantum Riddler over in Exile. He could draw a bunch of cards next turn and find some more spells with the Vivi. Of course, can't activate it for mana with the Conqueror in play, but he really just cares about that triggered ability at this point.
Right, just wants to draw the extra cards. And like you mentioned, the Riddler sets up these turns where sometimes you can play the Riddler with 1 card in hand, empty out the hand again, and then play another cantrip card. Also, with Fear of Missing Out, the nice thing about Fear of Missing Out is if you play Fear of Missing Out with 2 cards in hand, because you're discarding 1 as part of the cost, you would have 1 upon the resolution, and then you would draw the extra card off the Riddler. So some things to think about for Ryan next turn, as we see Katarina deploy a Meticulous Archive.
Yeah, there's the Pinnacle Star Cage still in hand, and I'm not sure what the other card is, but I don't think it's particularly good. Still just hasn't found another piece of card advantage or a big threat.
It's crazy. Katarina's gone through, I think, more than like 70% of their deck, it seems, at this point, because they also resolve the star charts that put cards in the bottom. So, and it's crazy that they haven't found a threat. And I wonder if that's part of a sideboard thing where maybe they boarded out the Overlords, and it's entirely possible that they just don't have as many threats post board as they did game 1.
Yeah, that was a Tishana's Tidebinder drawn for Katarina, which should be pretty good here. Have to imagine this will counter the Vivi trigger and turn Vivi off.
But yeah, because at 3 life, you're very, very scared of dying to that trigger. So
yeah. And now the Vivi is a 1/4, so the Tidebinder also checks it in combat.
Ooh, a Flood Maw here for Ryan. Does that unlock any potential? So 1 Seam Rip. Oh, there is a Seam Rip that has a Profs on it. So that could potentially gives Ryan access to something. Not this turn, maybe next turn.
Yeah, just goes for the Riddler. He's going to try to set up a lethal attack, I think. Maybe just bounce the Clarion Conqueror. He also... he doesn't have the Wild Ride anymore, so just 2 attackers next turn.
Yeah, it could maybe even bounce the Clarion Conqueror to turn on the Vivi's mana. Oh, I guess that's still shut off by the Tidebinder, so that wouldn't work.
Yeah, exactly. This is a close one now.
Tricky spot. Because now Katarina's finally found a position to attempt to start racing, right? They've been able to deploy the Clarion Conqueror, the Tidebinder still has the Restless Anchorage, so it is potentially threatening a 2-turn lethal, and that's an Elspeth off the top. That one might actually just push the clock as well.
Katarina made a token with 1 Fountain Port, sacked it to the other one, and found Elspeth, but can't activate it because of their own Clarion Conqueror.
Oh no! Goodness. I forgot about that. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, multiple dyssynergies rearing their head for Katarina in this game, has that Pinnacle Star Cage in hand that just hurts their battlefield more because of all the seam rips and the rest in peace. And now Clarion Conqueror plus Elspeth, another Nombo.
Well, Star Cage doesn't hit enchantments, right?
Hmm.
Star
Oh
Cage
yeah, it
only
doesn't hit
hits
those.
artifacts creatures. Yeah,
I'm
yeah, yeah.
thinking temporary lockdown.
Yeah,
Okay.
no, you get locked down in the brain. I get it. I get it. We've been traumatized by lockdown for too much.
So
But
that
yeah,
one's not a
that's
Nombo. But Clarion Conqueror at Elspeth definitely is.
okay. Bouncing Clarion Conqueror, and with only 1 mana for Katarina, I believe that is just going to be enough. Yeah, and that's going to be extension. Crazy, crazy match. I mean, there was a ton of back and forth that entire match. There was, so many different times where we thought Katarina had the ability to find a threat. But yeah, in the end, Ryan takes it down. But yeah, talk to me about that match, Ross. Just like the progression of that game and how that all played out.
I mean, it really comes down to Katarina not being able to find more card advantage or a threat. There was a ton of time in that game where Katarina was very stable on the battlefield. They had an opportunity to turn the corner, but they were only able to muster a mediocre clock with the Restless Anchorage and then eventually the Clarion Conqueror. Never actually found a big threat. The one that they drew finally was an Elspeth that they couldn't use. So Ryan just had tons of time, and the all-star for him was Quantum Riddler. That was the card that got him into the game from a card advantage perspective and kept him in the game to grind through all the removal from Katarina. And that was enough when there was no threat coming for Katarina to close out the game. And I think you raised an important point. Like maybe Katarina boarded down on threats to try to bring in more interaction, and it bit them there. They needed the ability to turn their corner and couldn't.
Alrighty. Well, we'll have to see if Ryan can continue to take it down, but we're going to be going to a backup match here. Looks like we are starting in game number 2 of the Azorius Control Mirror match with Sibi on the right-hand side of your screen up a game. Both players are 4-1-1 going into our last round, so potentially a win and in, depending on how breakers. There's a lot of weird breaker math, and there was a lot more X1s than there usually is, so some things to think about. But Azorius Control Mirror, I was going to say who you got, but I think the answer is pretty obvious. It's Azorius Control, right?
Yeah, you got time. That's what you
You
have.
got
You're
time.
going to
Yeah,
be
we
here
got
for a
time.
while.
At least we're coming
Really,
into game 2.
yeah. And the name of the game here in these control mirrors is land drops. You
Hmm.
want to make all of your land drops until about turn 27. Then maybe you can stop.
Maybe you can play one spell on turn 27.
Yeah, it's the person that makes more land drops, has more mana, is better able to fight counter wars, and that advantage is huge because they're going to be the one that gets to resolve more card advantage and then have more threats, more answers over the course of the game. So it really boils down to mana. That said, here Matt Sims, starting out with an end step card draw spell doesn't get countered, so ahead on cards already. And early on, when you're ahead on cards, that means you're better able to make your land drops.
Yeah. Now the one thing for Sibi is Sibi does have Fountain Port. So, I guess there's also this thing where you mentioned how, a lot of players they don't really want to play spells in their own turns until very, very late in the game. But Fountain Port is a big part of that where, if you don't want to use your mana and you don't feel like you can because you're worried about your opponent having a counter spell, having access to Fountain Port. But Voice of Victory, that is certainly going to require an answer here from Sibi.
Yeah, there's a couple ways to break the dynamic of build up your mana and win a big counter war, and it's being able to use your mana on the end step, especially with something like Fountain Port that is hard to interact with, even if it just generates a little bit of advantage at a time, or a cheap threat that you can play early with a counterspell back, as Matt has done here, protecting the Voice of Victory with 3 steps ahead, and then you use that to put your opponent under pressure and force them to act first. Your other goal, other than making land drops, is you want your opponent to have to act first because then they're the one committing mana for a spell. You have more mana left over to win the counter war. They're tapped out. You get to untap and land your threat. So, Voice of Victory, does you're acting first, but at an early enough stage of the game that you're unlikely to see a really huge threat come down from Sibi, and you're going to force him to act first later in the game when it matters more because there's a bigger threat on the line. So the Voice of Victory here gives Matt a huge edge right now.
Oh yeah, and presumably being a post-board game, you wouldn't expect players to keep in stuff like Ultimate Day of Judgment, Seam Rip. Maybe there's some argument to keeping in some number of the wraths because there is the presence of the Overlord of the Mistmoors. And if it's one of these things where, okay, if both players have Voice of Victory in their sideboard, they both know what's going on and they both know they're gonna like their opponent's gonna board them in. So maybe it's sort of a leveling game where if you expect them to board in Voice of Victory, maybe you decide to keep in some number of seam rips or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, you have your get loss, and then it's just a question of do I feel like that's enough? Because the voice of victories are hugely important, and if your opponent's on the play, really difficult to stop with a counter spell.
Yeah, it almost like gets to this weird situation where like player on the play plays it on turn two, player on the draw plays theirs on turn two, and then it's just like you're just staring at each other like,
Yeah, who
yeah,
kills the voice first, or
yeah.
who just gets to jam an Elspeth on 5 or an Overlord on 4.
But yeah, I mean Matt has access to all of his mana, and with the voice in play, Sippy tapped out, but doesn't have any big play here. So it's just gonna be content with holding up some mana. And I believe the holdings, it looks like there's a consult. I believe I saw Get Lost in Matt's hand, potentially another land as well. And there you mentioned the Get Lost is going to go ahead and target that voice. So now we're going to be in a spot where does Matt want to fight over this? And it looks like the answer is maybe yes, or maybe we're going for a consult first.
If he fights too much over things like get lost to protect his voice, then he might leave himself vulnerable to a big threat from Sibi, something like an Overlord or an Elspeth. So he does have to be careful in that regard. But if he just lets the voice die, then suddenly his advantage in this game is gone. So there's tension either way. It really depends on how, the texture of Matt's hand. If he feels really comfortable going long from his position, he can then let the voice die. If he just has a bunch of counter spells, not much card advantage, then sure, counter the get lost, apply more pressure, and use the counter spells to stop Sibi for long enough that the voice actually ends the game.
Yeah, there you go. And it looks like, the voice is going to go ahead and hit the graveyard. So Matt maybe didn't have a choice. In terms of the 2 mana counter spells, besides No Moralized, looking at sideboards, Sibi has no copies of Negate, and Matt has 1 copy of Negate. So I guess if you're talking about the counter war, slight edge to Matt in that regard with that 1 copy of Negate. It's only 1 copy, but these players do see a ton of cards over the course of a long game. And as we see a second Voice of Victory with 4 mana up here for Matt, potentially seeing if Sibi wants to have a fight again.
Yeah, it's definitely another reason to let the first voice go. You have a replacement copy, likely found that off the consult. And that's why you want to consult in response to that spell, because what card you take make an impact on whether or not you want to interact with the get lost.
Surveillance land here for Matt's going to go ahead and bin another land. And it looks like there is some foils in Matt's hand. It's kind of a little hard to get a good look. Is that a Stoic Sphinx? I
It
think it
is
is,
indeed.
Ross. Let's see if we can get this one on screen because I can't imagine a lot of the viewers at home maybe have seen this card before. This card 5/3 flash flying and it has hexproof as long as you haven't cast a spell this turn. So you see Matt deciding to main phase that Stoic Sphinx there. Because once it goes back to Sibi's turn, Matt has not cast any spells, and that thing will have hexproof. And this is a very interesting. It's like from Sibi's side of things, how do you even kill this if Matt just never plays a spell the rest of the game?
Yeah, you have to trade for it in combat. So an Overlord here would be a great play. Meringue River Regent wouldn't bounce the Sphinx, but just the 6/7 body would check it in combat. And here is an Overlord, but looks like Sibi doesn't have mana 7, so just going to impend it.
Yeah, and this is kind of an interesting sequence too, right? Because now if Matt attacks with the Stoic Sphinx, Sibi decides to double block. Matt can maybe have an interactive spell to answer the token, but if you answer the token, you've now cast a spell, which opens up the possibility of Sibi having a get loss. So there's like this weird back and forth here that I think is going to be very interesting to see how this plays over the next couple of turns.
We do see the get lost in Matt's hand, so if you're mad, I think you've got to now fight to protect the Sphinx, given that you've given up the 2 voices. But do you have enough time to grind through the tokens, then kill Sibi before the Overlord comes back online and replaces them? That is not an easy question to answer with yes.
All right. Well, we are going to try and have a fight over this, and maybe I mean it's possible that Sibby just doesn't even have a get lost in hand to try and fight over the Sphinx to begin with. But that's why you kind of see that the hesitation there from Matt, right? Where it's he wasn't sure whether or not Sibby had the get lost, as we see an Overlord
Okay.
deployed here for Matt, and now that's going to be met with a no moralize.
Wow,
So
the Overlord would have been clutch. It would have turned Matt's clock from 4 turns into 2. But the no more lies really huge there. And if you're Sibby, you now know that your opponent doesn't have a no more lies because Matt would have fought over that.
oh,
So
for sure.
you can feel pretty comfortable tapping out for some other big threat if you have it.
Yeah, and there was an interesting sequencing. Matt decided to go to combat first, have the fight in combat, and then go for the Overlord post combat. Maybe if he had gone for the Overlord pre combat, had the ability to pay for normalize, but then you get into this weird situation where if Sibby has the get lost, then that kind of opens up the door. So very interesting sequence there as we see a get lost take care of the Meringue River Regent. Um, didn't get a good look at what that bounced. Did it just
It
bounce
bounced the two
nothing?
maps. It bounced the 2 maps from the
Two
previous Get
maps.
Lost.
Okay.
The only
But
things it could.
yeah, now the Sphinx is just locked in here, getting in, and Matt's potentially going to resolve another threat here. Is that a meringue of his own? It is.
Yeah, and I think Matt drew a No More Lies, which is
Ooh.
a card that Sibby is not expecting because he clearly didn't have it the previous turn. So that was an excellent turn to draw No More Lies. He has exactly enough mana to play his last threat and hold it up. And Sibby, is at 12, is looking at 11, and needs to do something about it. And you have the answer. What a draw.
And I think Sibby's about to go for this Elspeth, but if that is the case, he is not going to like the outcome. As you mentioned, Matt did pick up that Nomoralize. How about a Beza? Is that worth a Nomoralize? Probably.
Yeah, almost anything I think it is. And Sibby just has to be sad and look at his hand. Okay. Has the Get Lost for the Sphinx, which is now no longer hexproof after the No More Lies is cast. Okay.
Okay.
That solves one question, but this river region isn't exactly a 2 turn clock, which is enough to get it under the Overlord.
Yeah, because the Overlord will come off. The Overlord will come into play next turn, but it won't be able to attack before the meringue crosses the finish line. So,
Yeah.
I believe there is an anchorage there for Sibby, so that
Yeah.
could maybe provide a one-turn chump blocker if Matt can't find a demo field or another removal spell.
It was just a couple lands off the maps for Matt, including another
Ooh.
anchorage. And yeah, no answer to this Elspeth found. So now Sibby in the driver's seat. He answered every single threat, and Sims flooding a little bit.
Yeah, and Sims has the restless anchorage to be able to take care of the Elspeth. But with that Overlord in play, if Sims does not have an answer for that Overlord, it's going to be very, very hot. Love it upstairs. Just that the point upstairs. I mean, I guess if you're in Matt's position, you kind of have to, right? You can't really. You got to get this game over with. It's somehow, it's tough. Is it an Elspeth of Matt's own?
Maybe you could go wide here, but the Overlord now is going to make a bunch of flying blockers.
Elspeth at Restless Anchorage combo makes second map. Okay.
Oh,
Ooh.
Tashana's Tidebinder was the draw, but
Ooh.
Sibby found a No More
Right.
Lies.
Oh my goodness, that sequence. All right, so that Normalize is going to take care of the Tidebinder, and that means the flying blockers commence. There should actually be 4 flying blockers
Oh,
here from the Elspeth.
and Sims getting very punished for cracking the map from Restless Anchorage on that turn. Could have
Oh.
had 3 mana up to pay for a No More Lies, opted to be more aggressive, which, given his spot where he's really falling behind, makes sense, but got very punished for it.
Yeah, and I think it also makes sense from Matt's perspective because he didn't really have a lot of action in his hand, so he almost wants to use the no more the map token as more of just ways to find more action. But yeah, we're seeing a normalize from Sibby, which is an interesting play, but that's going to cut off Matt's ability to animate the anchorage this turn.
Yeah, now Sibby can easily attack down Matt's Elspeth.
Now there is a restless anchorage, and Sibby's at 4, but Sibby can also just leave back a couple of those moths to potentially block the anchorage. It's also not lethal next turn.
think
There you go.
I guess
Well,
it's
that's
lethal right
lethal.
now.
Apparently, it was
Yeah,
lethal. So, but
it was a
not from that.
19.
There you go.
If you just pumped the team with the Elspeth.
All right. So Sibi taking down the match 2-0 in our Azorius control mirror. Yeah, very interesting match. There was a lot of back and forth there. The Stoic Sphinx, where both players were kind of staring at each other for a little bit. There was that weird sequence where, as you mentioned, there was a normalized top deck, but I think overall a very, very interesting match. So
Yeah,
that is going to do. Go
the
ahead.
voice of victories really changed the dynamic. Instead of everybody gearing up for the one big turn, voice forced action early, and that turned the matchup from something very cagey and slow into kind of just a slugfest. Both players is forced to play out their cards and tap out, which then led their opponent to tap out for their own threats. And so then they dig for answer. Then they just start hurling haymakers at each other. And it was Sibi, the last man standing through that fight.
Some battle cruiser magic. Love to see it. Well, with that is going to do it here for the final round of Swiss. But final round of Swiss means we have a top 8 here just for you in just a couple of minutes. So we're going to take a very, very short break. We'll come back with the top 8 breakdown, top 8 slide, and we'll see who takes it down. See you back here in just a minute.